Okay, are we ready to reconvene? So we are on to I-5302 CBI. Barb, Paul,
Daryl.
Daryl.
I'll just do a quick explanation of this. So, um, there's $13,775 in a new ask for this year. However, it's not really true that it was nil last year. What's happened is that this position, and there's a good explanation here, but this position is funded 0.8 by CBI and 0.2 by FCSS under the before and after school program. The CBI portion of it was set at a level that at one time covered a full 0.8 of that FTE, but for years hasn't due to increases in salaries and benefits and other things. So we've actually always funded this person to a full 1.0 FTE, and we've just gone over budget those for the last several years with it. So what we're trying to do is, I guess there's a few choices with this position. You can say we'll actually legitimately actually add this request in and say we will fund 100% of it, which we don't recommend. We will add this request in, but then go in and talk to these communities, more in Munson, Delia, etc., to say, by the way, we've been delivering programs that help you, that you should be paying us for. So again, that's part of that bigger collaboration in there. We could, which is my sense would be a preferred option. Another option would be to say when we run out of money, so 0.57 plus 0.2, 0.77 of the year through the year, we just lay this person off. Of course, we just know that that's not realistic, or we make this person a 0.37 or 0.75, and basically they will work 4 days a week or that portion thereof. So, so that just to kind of explain that it's not really, we've just gone over budget in the last several years with it. We've never formalized that there actually is money that's not being covered under the two budgets. So that or under the CBI ask or request from the government.
Tom.
Could you give me an example of a CBI program?
One of the programs that CBI covers is called the Good Food Box. So that's getting people together to assemble healthy groceries and then meal planning for families. That was one. Additionally, there would be Roots of Empathy is another example. Yeah. Just give me a second here.
I don't understand the tie-in to Morin, Munson, and Delia. Like those sound like Drumheller programs.
The program is funded through the province, and the province stipulates that a portion of the service that's provided goes out to Morin, Munson, and Delia through that geography. So what was originally 80% of the funding in the position covered that. The first iteration of the community building initiative was, and I believe Councillor DeMott actually referred to it, was the legal graffiti program about 10 years ago or so. And originally that program started out as a contract through McMahon Child and Family Services. What happened 10 years ago was we found that we weren't getting a whole lot back in return for the contract funding that we received, or the grant funding we received from the province. So we then converted the position into a partially funded town employee through our FCSS program, as Daryl had mentioned earlier. Just give me a second here. So there'd be program support for various aspects of Roots of Empathy. That's a program where you bring infants into classrooms, and then those children are then making a connection with, in most cases, it's a grade 4 or 5 classroom, I believe. Grade 5. Yeah, okay, so that's under seasonal FCSS.
So, if I may, under the revenue portion under CBI, it says CBI funds from Child and Family Services. The program includes focus on creating positive community dynamics through programming to deal with emergent social issues in the community. Bullying and welcoming communities. Well, that's projects that was identified in 2011. And some of the things they have in here for projects are welcoming, Drum Life, youth project for $1,800. Almost all of the budget is, we only get $42,685 from the government, and a big portion of that goes to wages. Very little in, I believe Roots of Empathy is FCSS.
Yes, thank you for the correction, Barb. Yeah, actually, if you go into the CBI portion in 5302, much of that is just program and committee support for different activities under that cross over into FCSS in a number of different areas. There is some travel that is from Drumheller to Munson Moore and Delia, and some support for foster care promotion, welcoming communities, and actually identifying the part of the youth project development that we talked about earlier here. Some photocopying and other just small administrative expenses, but as Barb said, it's really just about the position.
Tony?
What kind of demand is on this position right now? Is the person's plate really full? Like, is it a full-time position, or are we using 3/4 of the program, or any idea on the demand for the programs?
Well, I think it's a full-time position is funded as a full-time equivalent, one person. That individual does lots of different work and supports lots of different activities and events. So I would say, yeah, it's been used over time, right? I'm not going to say, I'm not going to say that there's a lack of demand for the position.
Lisa?
So if most of the amount is for salary, where does the funding come to for the events that this position is supposed to put on?
Usually it's for event support, so there could be other examples like family fun. We do Drumheller victims, or Drumheller Anti-Violence Committee Coalition is one of the others. It's really supporting different events. So, for example, if we do family fun, typically this individual would help to organize and participate in holding of events through family fun or different committees that are doing different things throughout Drumheller. Could be the early years fair, some support on some of the other community committees that are out there under interagency.
So has this individual, if you were to be able to give a percentage, how much of their time is spent on Moore and Munson and Delia compared to Drumheller?
Probably not as much in the last couple of years as probably should be. But that being said, we find that a lot of the programs that we offer in Drumheller are attended by people that are from Moore, Munson, and Delia. So they come here and they participate in our programs. We have in the past gone and run a program in Moore, Munson, and Delia, but not great frequency in doing that. So, probably not even as much as once per month you would see that kind of activity. and all that would happen would be really organizing a gathering of people in that area that have a certain interest in whatever program they might decide they want to have.
Okay, one more, and then I'll give the floor to Jay. So, have we ever historically approached Warren, Munson, and Delia in regards to this program? Are they aware that we fund these programs for their communities or help fund or support?
Well, no, they're not aware because up to this point we've just treated it as provincial funding, and that part of the mandate and requirement of the funding that we received from the province was to go deliver the program however frequently in those areas.
Thanks, Paul.
Jay?
Thank you, Worship. I'm not sure that we're coming at this from the right perspective. The way I read this is the overwhelming majority of this position's cost is being paid for by the province of Alberta with just a few strings attached, even though we use that person to deliver a host of other services through FCSS. And so our choice is, because that person's become an integral part of the FCSS programming, they of course have been their salary has increased along with everyone else's under the collective bargaining agreement, and but the funding that goes with it from the province has not kept pace. So we're behind in funding this position, but someone else is still footing 80% of the bill. So if we said, well, let's not do this anymore, we're actually losing a $50,000 position that we were only paying or only being asked to pay $13,000 more for it, right? Yeah. So for me, it kind of sounds like we maybe have not been delivering. Let's not get too focused on how much of this money was being used to provide services elsewhere, because it sounds as though that hasn't been a major drain. But on the contrary, this is a mechanism by which we have grossly subsidized a full-time staff position for a number of years, and we would really like that to continue, I would imagine.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, the combination of funding, because this is a split position between FCSS and the CBI program, the $13,000 represents the erosion of funding the funding from CBI has not increased over the years.
Right.
So it hasn't kept pace with the increases that we would normally provide for staff through collective bargaining agreements and so on. So that's where you see the differential, and that's where the gap is.
I'm glad we've identified it as new spending, but it doesn't change the fact that the first sentence is all that's required as far as I was concerned. Either we're gonna say we're making a broad scope cut to FCSS in terms of eliminating an entire position, or cutting it back, which I'm not sure is I'm not sure council's up to speed enough on who delivers what programs in FCSS to make a decision like that. I think that's a CAO role. And since I'm not sure we're going down that particular vein, for me it's more of the contract requires, and so as a result, in order to continue for us to get this great subsidization of a position we take full advantage of for this community's benefit, it costs us this money, and that sounds like a bargain. Is that a different way to look at it?
No, that's perfect, Jay, because I think the comment, at least from my perspective, is that we wanted to bring this to everyone's attention, that here's a shortfall. From our perspective, we've already done this. We've gone back to the province to say, hey, by the way, your funding from 2006, it doesn't cut it anymore. It's that old that the funding, since the funding's been changed, or maybe 2008, but it's been a long time. So we've already gone back to them about that, but we just wanted to flag that to council's attention to say that we've got this delta, and we just want you to know about it. So.
And one of the reasons why you wouldn't have seen this in previous years is that we've had turnover in that position, and so what effect that's had is it removes the overspend that we had to cover off for that position to run in a given year. So if we missed, there was a gap of maybe 2 months worth of service because we had changeover of staff, then there really wasn't any excess that was being spent by the town.
Tom?
Yeah, it's not 80% anymore though. It's just 57%. So I still think at 43 cents on the dollar, it's a good deal.
Those girls work hard. I'll just say that. Any more comments? Okay, next item, 6201, Economic Development Contracted Officer. Or it's automatically in? We don't have to discuss it?
It's it was in last year's budget, but we didn't put it in this year's budget. Is that correct? Like, that's what I read when I see this yellow. And I think we had sort of talked about this in earlier council that we weren't going to, because we needed to figure out what the heck we were doing with this position in the first place. Is that correct?
Jay?
Yeah, Your Worship. So a couple of things. One, if it was included, it actually would take the base figure, even though we've been whittling away at it, it would take the base figure up to 481, because it's not included in the 421, right, Barb? So, you know, it was a concept that was not easily brought to fruition. It's probably the best way to describe it. And I think, well, it may be fair to say that the overall recommendations from the task force could easily exceed the 100,000 that we're going to come to in a few minutes. That this position, allocating funding for this position, is premature. I would expect that it may or may not be a recommendation from the task force, but as it stands, I'd rather see it come out of whatever that final figure of implementing the core recommendations that we feel most strongly about from that group, rather than deciding again that we need to earmark this particular position, which A, we couldn't hire for, and B, seemed to flummox everyone on what their role really was. So I'm surprisingly, given that it sprung from my brain, entirely comfortable with it coming off completely.
And just to be clear, there are a number of deliverables from 2017 that are still pending that were funded from the 2017 budget. So you'll be seeing those probably by the end of March from our partners at CAPE that we contracted to do some of that work.
So just to be clear then, because we're going on to the next one, if it's recommended or not recommended, that's we're leaving ability to move around here. Okay, perfect. That's all I wanted to be clear. Yeah, because again, it's one of those things of whatever they come forward with, we need to, what we can afford, we need to definitely review them all. Okay, so next item is Economic Development Task Force funds that we have set aside. Any comments? Fred?
Now that number just came out of the air, and we're all hoping that out of the task force, we're going to have recommendations that are immediate, medium term, and long term. I certainly think the short-term ones and some of the initiatives that I've been privy to that are coming up are going to be probably not moving into the total of that, but I don't imagine it's going to exceed that. So I don't know. I'm excited to see what they're bringing forward.
Tom?
Yeah, and as was said at the initial meeting, the idea that we might have to spend a few dollars in Drumheller to create an economic impact that could spin off to millions. So I look at this 100,000 as simply an investment, and I think it could, and from what I've seen so far, be a very good investment, and that's what I'm expecting out of this. I'm literally expecting millions to come out of this.
It's an exciting time, so thank you for everybody considering that. Corporate review, comments. Tom?
So I was fairly recently through a corporate review. We did a corporate review of the Drumheller and District Seniors Foundation. And a corporate review was fairly good to kind of analyze
Comments?
I see this as, in the same vein, and I think Tom's, those are basic questions that we haven't answered yet, and so for me, this one, as I've mentioned before, we've already lined up a number of strategic priorities for 2018, and as much as I believe that this process is probably long overdue, having not happened in this organization during its entire organization, I believe. It screams a 2019 priority to me, and just because, one, I don't know how that's a point in a quarter of property tax increase by itself, and almost a point and a half, and I wonder if we could not perhaps do something internally. I mean, to answer your question, Tom, I don't know the answer yet. I think part of it is we would probably need a thorough job description review up and down the organization about, those haven't been reviewed in a long time probably. But I don't know enough about it. I know that I'm concerned about adding one more gigantic project to the list of projects for 2018, and especially one that has a gigantic price tag we weren't ready for.
Lisa?
I would just correlate those thoughts. 1.5% increase on property taxes for a corporate review on top of all the other asks is going to be a hard pill to swallow for most of our residents, considering the present economy that's reality. So I would feel really comfortable with that being in 2019, and that would give the organization with a new CAO at least one good solid year under his belt, and I think that would be adequate planning for the future.
Okay, Tony?
I'd agree. It does seem like a big number, but I think once we work through it, I think that would pay back in spades, especially for the fact that there's never ever been one done. So I look at it as an investment, but I also agree we got a lot on our plate this year, and to push it out to 2019 would be advantageous in a lot of ways. For us to get going, and for the CAO to have some time in his chair, and for other projects to move ahead, and maybe even to do some investigation as what kind of detail we could expect from such a report, and look at it in 2019. But I see value in doing it.
So my feeling on it is it was something I did check out when you change a CAO and change a mayor and change half your council. It's something that should be considered, and yes, it's never been done in the past. However, in saying that, I have so much faith in what I've seen in Daryl thus far, and he is trying to resolve a lot of things throughout the town hall. And is he perfect? Sorry, Daryl. No, but just kidding. No, he's doing a great job, and I do think I'm with all of you. I think it's something that should be considered in respect to the citizens of the community, and something that at the same time, I think we do have Daryl is trying to work on a lot of things and making a difference, and let's push that off to 2019 for review. Correct?
I would concur with everybody that said it, and Daryl, you can't be best because Tom's best. He was, yeah.
Just one or I guess two comments. So I agree this with the workload, new council, new CEO, and everything. I think it's better to look at it next year, plan for it, and actually then we can ask and get what we ask for. But just as a point of note, we've actually done a corporate review in 2001 or 2002, one of those years. So shortly after we amalgamated with Badlands. Yeah. So in that back then the review was I was trying to remember the number. It was either $71,000 or $90,000 for the review back then. So it's not a cheap undertaking. So, but it was also very thorough. They went through policy and procedure manual, job descriptions, organizational charts. There's some very good work that was done back then. So,
And those are things you're talking about doing anyways. So I mean, maybe at some point you can give us that tree that helps us all get educated, because I know that there's 4 of us here that have never really been part of town hall, and I mean, I see a lot more than the 3 new ones. So I think, in fairness to us all, it wouldn't hurt to have a breakdown as how it all operates. Lisa.
So just on that vein, on that review that was done, do you recall whether they found any cost savings or efficiencies that equated to the cost of the review compared to the outcome?
Off the top of my head, Lisa, I don't recall. Remember, it was also a bit of a different reason for doing it, because they had amalgamated with a whole bunch. It was the city going to a town, back to the town, and incorporating a whole bunch of outside services. So I think what it did is it looked at how the organization should be structured, because because I know that it definitely had changed from before the review to after the review, in terms of that. I think that's sort of around the time when they got rid of all of the committees, the individual committees, and had a city clerk at the time, and got rid of. So they did definitely do some changes there. I don't remember in my reading of it that there was specific cost saving mentions in the report. So.
Okay. Thanks, Daryl.
So if we don't do that, Daryl, is it fair though to ask that at some point we set a timeline that we can kind of be updated on what you see and what you don't see? And
that'd be part of my quarterly reports to council. So
perfect. Any other questions? Okay, travel Drumheller 6204. Comments? I'm going to ask the first comment on this. I'm obviously new here, and throughout my years in the valley, I've heard nothing but controversy around travel of Drumheller. The gals gave a great presentation and stuff, but there's still an uncomfortable thing in the valley about travel Drumheller. And can somebody give me some history, because I'm really uncomfortable making a decision on this one. Jay?
I'll do my best, and I know that Lisa and Tom and Paul can all chip in. So under the tourism master plan, it identified a number of things that we don't do that other major tourism hubs do, and that might be a reason why they're more successful. And one of the largest ones was that they all have a destination marketing organization, someplace that was dedicated to not just going out and promoting one element of the valley's experience, but the entire valley. So that was the reason for it to spring into being, and it started up as still an arm's length. It was not a creature of the town. It was meant to be started up independently, but our role had to be, again, in terms of initial seed funding to get them rolling. And so a lot of the controversy that is now associated with Travel Drumheller has everything to do with the business license bylaw that became the mechanism for them to fund the marketing that they were going to do on behalf of the valley, and so that, and the fact that the first executive director was a polarizing character is a fair assessment, and so the history on terms of our funding is that you'll remember me saying that we too did not view this as perpetual funding, that we were hoping through the business license bylaw to actually make them be independent completely of taxpayer funds, and that was the purpose behind that bylaw. When it had to be repealed, we wanted the organization to survive, because that core reason for being this is something that tourism centers across the globe have that we don't have, still was there. And so to allow them to help them survive this transition, it just made sense to provide what had started off as just some operational funding. And then comes my spin. My perception, though, is that despite the fact that each and every year I have said to all those involved, wait a second, I'm not comfortable with the idea that your business model always includes this figure from the town of Drumheller, and more importantly, it reflects a great chunk of your operating costs, where almost everything that you raise from the people who benefit the most directly is always promised to marketing and marketing alone. And so I'm entirely comfortable on the wean, that even though the ask was for 30, I'm entirely comfortable on a 33% cut, because the message is not getting through that we didn't intend this to be perpetual, and more importantly, we disagree with their assertion that they make quite firmly that it is always someone else's, the taxpayer's responsibility, because they're an overall good to the community, to fund their operating. And I, for one, disagree on that regard. So I'm not saying that we have to go from 30 to 20 to 10 to nothing. There's nothing that says we have to have that kind of progression. But to continue to fund them at the levels we had been does not send the message, A, this is going to run out someday, or B, we disagree with your fundamental premise that the people who are contributing towards marketing are never contributing towards operating. I don't know of any other organization who's ever made such a demand that the people who will see the most dramatic direct benefit have some insulation from ever having to pay for the operation of that organization. I just disagree fundamentally. So I still think Travel Drumheller can play an important role. They've much like Hope College Community or Badlands Community College, they've had some significant stutter steps in their launch. But again, I think it sends a good signal to the community that we do think it's an appropriate use of some public funds, but not forever, and not necessarily the entire funding of their operating costs. That would be my message.
Tom?
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. You nailed it. The only other thing I would mention there is that there seems to be kind of a misconception, which is very frustrating on the part of some of the major operators, in that this is costing them money. And what I am absolutely flabbergasted at is the idea that, no, we are merely asking you to collect money from people coming in your door and then put it into an organization that is promoting more people to come in your door. And so Travel Drumheller hasn't seemed to have been able to get that across to, the hotels and the campgrounds and everybody, that, I mean, this money is basically, it's not costing you a cent. You are merely collecting it from people using your service, and then this organization is turning it into promoting so more people can come and use your service. And so it's absolutely frustrating that they can't kind of grasp that idea that they could be this organization and they could be a better organization by simply using some of this money for operating costs and organizational costs, and not just using it all for marketing.
Lisa?
Yeah, Tom and Jay couldn't have said it better. But I think the main thing, in my opinion, is that by only allotting 20,000 rather than the 30 as their ask, we're putting the onus back on that organization to be responsible for thinking outside the box and finding ways to bring in that revenue to make their organization either profitable or have a continuation. And I think that amount at 20,000 is sustainable. Thanks, Jay. Good word. Is still acting in good faith with that organization, saying that we're still here, we've still got your hand to help you through this transition period. As Tom had pointed out, and Jay as well with it when it came to the bylaw that ended up being squashed. We did take away what they were planning on as one of their main revenue streams. So that being said, I can fully support 20,000 rather than the 30,000 original ask, as it is in good faith to ensure that the organization stays around to be able to promote our beautiful valley.
Excuse me. Anybody else? Fred.
Perhaps another one for my buy-in, like perhaps the 2-year is a good projection, with perhaps looking at any support after that, some sort of a matching plan with people that have a vested interest inputting and us matching. So maybe there'll be some incentive for them to look for alternate funding as well as a group.
Yeah, I guess where I'm at is just listening to some people in the valley that, have been here for a while. It just seems like, again, it's just some of those things where we have everybody pulling the chain in their own directions. And at some point, if we could unite this, and I think that the feel is getting there, and but I think there's still some disconnects. So maybe I'll have to see how I can help that out. But yes, obviously, and I still, again, in their presentation, don't understand. They have all those businesses to help fund this thing. Why? I mean, if they charge the business $5 to be on the website, I don't understand the whole background. So I got to do some more homework on this, obviously. Go ahead, Jay.
Just the only point that we didn't make was what Tom was referring to, of course, is that they have the capacity. They're allowed to just charge a destination marketing fee. Hotels are on their bills. We all pay it wherever we go. You wouldn't call Red Deer a hub, but I know I pay a DMF to go there when I stay, right? And so that's why what Councillor Zrisky was referring to as they're collecting this fee from their patrons. It's not as though it comes off their bottom line from a different pot. And so the idea that some of that money couldn't go to operating a marketing organization is a fallacy, in my opinion. And so, yeah, but I agree that they are absolutely, that was the whole point of their reason for being, Heather, was to help the valley pull all in one direction to market the entire experience we have to offer, instead of just fracturing it off into the different clicks and attractions. So that's their reason for being, and I think they're starting to move forward in a positive direction again. So I'm very comfortable with the amount that was in the budget at 20,000.
Lisa or Christine.
So just a question, and I might have completely missed it from when they did their presentation. Do they have any figures or anything showing exactly how well they have impacted Drumheller in terms of tourism, or is it just the Tyrrell that's basically driving everybody here? Like, I'm just curious. Like, are they doing awesome?
Boy, I don't know, guys. I'm not sure anybody remembers the stuff from that. I wouldn't want to put myself in the role of as advocate. It's for me. I think, given that they've had a tough time with all the transitions they've had to face in just their 3 years of existence, or is it 4 now?
Probably closer to 4.
Yeah. I know that they had some very specific stats as it was to driving website traffic, because guess what? In marketing, that's the easiest thing there is to track. Whereas trying to figure out if there were X number more visitors and how it was they wound up being visitors is a much more difficult thing to measure. So, Paul, do you remember anything they said about impact? I mean,
the only thing I can say is they reported on their web statistics. They're just gone through a website redesign, and from that, you saw some positive increases, but at the same time, there are so many different factors when it comes to tourism traffic. We know that in Drumheller in 2017, we had the biggest visitation year we've ever had. You then ask a number of questions. Is that population? Is that currency? Is that forest fires? What was it?
Jurassic World.
Jurassic Park movie. Whatever the case may be, there are a number of factors that drive people to Drumheller. But at the same time, they do have a more solid organization over time. And just extending on Jay's comments in the preamble, the entire purpose of Travel Drumheller was to establish sustainable funding for tourism marketing to get people to come to Drumheller. And that was definitely missing previous to their existence. So, right, flowing directly from the tourism master plan, this was number one on the list. And they continue on, but have had their fits and starts, as has been discussed earlier. But I think they are making good traction, and they're getting a good reputation. The other thing is that by having this organization, they're able to leverage funding to match marketing dollars through the province of Alberta and other mechanisms that are out there. That didn't exist before because they were not a bona fide destination marketing organization. Now that they are, they can access more funds and they can build more partnerships through that organizational structure.
Fred. Paul, can you tell me now? I understand Julia is going to be. Is she chairing that now?
I would say she's the interim chair.
Interim chair, not long term.
No, it's not our position on that. Typically, is that town of Drumheller staff member, we wouldn't want to see chairing that type of an organization just on an interim basis. Okay. Ideally, and this has been from square one, we want to have someone from the industry itself representing the interests of hospitality in Drumheller, and being a face. In the past, that was Dan Sullivan from Canalta representing Canalta, but there's others as well. We had representatives from the quality in as well.
I would hope that we would encourage that to speed along as fast as we can, so that Julia's got time to do the job that we want her to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think as in any volunteer opportunities that we have in Drumheller, any members of council that know strong candidates that they would like to see participating in those boards, certainly worthwhile to promote people that you know that would have influence and be good representatives.
Just to keep going on that, I mean, I know there's talk about portions of the task force looking for ways to stay involved. Certainly the group that's focused on tourism, that would be a very appropriate referral, is to serve on a board like that.
Any other comments? Okay. One more to go, and Daryl, I'll let you speak on this.
So I've got one that didn't make it on this list, but this is sorry. And I already know the answer to this question, but I got to ask it anyway. So a few weeks ago at our council meeting, there was a presentation by the mayor of Brooks around the dinosaur trail, and so there was no ask at the time monetarily. However, there was an ask whether or not council supported it or not. So after that, I actually did get the financial ask for us, and of course, it's all dependent on the number of signs we wanted to put up, but the recommended number of signs in Drumheller would be about $25,000 to put these signs up. And at the low end, it would probably be about $9,000 or $10,000 to these signs. Now, if you recall, or if everyone recalls, the signs had to go on private property because they didn't actually follow the Alberta highway standards, so you couldn't put them in the right of way, so they had to go on private property, which meant that the cost I gave you was just simply the cost of the signage, not counting any potential leases we'd have to do or anything like that. So I just wanted to get a feeling from everyone or confirmation about where we think we would want to go with this.
I think we should put this away till 19, and in the interim, I think that this should be a three-way split between perhaps Travel Drumheller, even though we've just done this, and the Chamber of Commerce and the town. I think that we need buy-in from the community for some of these things.
So,
Absolutely. And then I think we should ask Brooks, did they have our permission to use Dinosaur Trail?
I take it one step further, Fred, is I think we should be talking to the two provincial parks at either end of the trail system, which is the Dinosaur Provincial Park and the Tyrrell. So just about there should be some contribution. Tyrrell, sorry. My mouth is dry. So, anyway.
Tom?
Well, much as I like Brooks, and much as I like Dinosaur Provincial Park, this signage seems to me kind of a win-win for Brooks and kind of a no-win for Drumheller. It looks to me like Brooks basically wants a chunk of our 500,000 tourists to go that way. And I can't see how those signs would necessarily promote people coming the other way. So I just see it as very good for Brooks and not particularly good for Drumheller.
Anybody else? Lisa?
Yeah, I would agree, Tom. And I think before any decision is made, the Tyrrell definitely has to be involved. That's the end point. And frankly, the taxpayer shouldn't be funding something that leads directly to an organization that's there for profit for the province. Yeah, and until we get and I think they need to do more work, especially with Alberta Transportation, to be able to have the signs placed in appropriate positions rather than where we think that we can make those agreements with landowners. I think that it kind of defeats the purpose if we end up missing some of the most highly trafficked and highly visible points to place it out in, somebody's yard per se along Dinosaur Trail. Right? So, no, I think the idea is interesting. The other aspect was the fact that they couldn't have it placed on a GPS. It would just be on the Google map. That would be an overlay. And I find that seemed like a bunch of work, and I don't think many people, frankly, would spend the time to do so. So, yeah, 2019, maybe revisit it with the proper parties at the table.
Tony?
My sentiments exactly. Good idea, maybe bad idea. I don't know. Maybe the jury's still out. Obviously, wrong players at the table. Not a council function, not public funds function. Travel Drumheller, most likely. Tourism out of the economic task force, maybe. But yeah, I don't think it's something for us to pick up on the ball right now. I'd like to see the task force play out. I'd like to see Travel Drumheller play out, and I'd like them to carry the ball if there was one to be carried.
Fred?
I'd make one more suggestion. We've called this Dinosaur Trail since I moved here. That's 40 years that we've got our own Dinosaur Trail. I would say we get our IT guys or our web guy to go out onto Google and peg that as the Dinosaur Trail, and if they want to hitch into ours, have at her.
Okay. The only thing I say on it is, yes, Brooks obviously are supporting it. The special areas in between are supporting it. There's communities in between supporting it. And I guess in my view of it all, which I'm obviously the only one in favor of it, is that it does connect Dinosaur Park and the Tyrrell. And yes, there'll be more go there, but there's also people come back. And I'm all about getting more people to this valley. So I thought it was kind of an interesting concept because it was more of a drive into country that most people that come to the Tyrrell or the Dinosaur Park would never see without that trail. So I thought it was kind of an interesting concept. As far as the name, I mean, we talked about the name when he was here, and we just said that, I mean, it's kind of a loop. No matter what way you slice it, it's going from one dinosaur park to another dinosaur park. So whether the trail comes to Drumheller and the trail goes, it's, you know, and it's not, I don't think we have the name sealed but anyways, it was discussion at that meeting that they, so yeah, so there are other parties involved, but I think the consensus has been spoken. Jay?
I was going to let this one go. I actually am favoring the idea of regional partnerships. I mean, we are a great regional collaborator when it comes to things, and when it comes to things like the Canadian, like the Canadian Badlands, is a perfect example where we know we are the major attraction. We know that to be true. It doesn't mean that we should only ever be interested in things which directly feather our own nest. Enhancing tourism in the province can only lead to better benefits for Drumheller. I understand what you're saying in terms of I think the traffic would mostly drain south. I get that, but it doesn't. If they were already here in the first place, that doesn't cost us anything. And if anybody comes north, then that's all to the good. I agree, though, that it doesn't fit for this year, and I also agree that other people should be at the table. But I wouldn't necessarily say I'm opposed at any fundamental level.
Christine?
I don't hate the idea of having the loop. I don't. I think it's something maybe we should look at doing in the future. Only because I hear from a lot of people that are not even just tourists, but people that even live here. You can come to Drumheller and you can do it all in a day, and so I find that might be a little bit detrimental to us if they can do it in a day and then just keep going because they're continuing on their trail, right? Like if we can get some things happening here that keep people here a little longer than a day, then I'd say, okay, let's get them on the road and out after. But I feel like they'd hit it and then they definitely have no reason to stay the night.
Lisa?
I just want to make a comment on that. There's 5 museums in this valley alone. I think the onus is on us as community representatives to ensure that people aren't misinformed as to the opportunities that this valley offers. So, yes, maybe they can do the museum in a day. And I would argue that because I could spend at least a good 2-3 days going through there if you want to study it adequately. But there's a Homestead Museum, there's the Atlas Coal Mine, there's a little museum downtown. Then there's etc. So there's definitely lots of things that we can promote as community leaders, right? So perhaps on that vein, it starts with us making sure that we promote our valley properly. But I'm not against the signs. On another hand, I just think, like I said, the correct people need to be at the table to make sure that the funding is done appropriately and that it doesn't fall on the taxpayers.
Okay. Anything else, Daryl? Directors? Oh, Fred?
This additional RCMP costs, they've submitted it. Is it just normal to just say, yeah, I'll just take that? Or can Tom and I go as a delegation and say, what? This is an 8% raise in our policing budget. Justify this. You train your own people in tasers, you train your own people, you pull guys off to train them to ride bicycles, you train them to use handcuffs. Why all of a sudden is this saddled on us? I don't think that should be. I mean, maybe it's a wasted effort, but just because it's the RCMP, I don't think we just take this sitting down. I think that Tom has 2 good cases to go to Edmonton. The one about officers' time at the institution to do federal charges inside an institution, and we've done that for the betterment of the province and the safety of Albertans. We are looking at equitable funding for rural policing probably having an effect on our local detachment. We're talking about 500,000 or 700,000 people a year coming for visits, and us having to police it. We talked about it earlier in our meeting, and now we're getting an $85,000 bill on top of it. I think that warrants a representative like Tom, who's been on here, to go to the RCMP and meet with the deputy commissioner and say, explain this to us. Why do we keep being saddled with this?
I don't disagree at all, Fred. As a matter of fact, I think what Tom has said is he's been trying to meet with the superintendent from Division K for quite some time. So, I would encourage that we should push back on some of those costs like that. So,
It's unfortunate that I didn't have this figure today for our RCMP meeting, because then I could have asked the detachment commander, but I will bring it up and I will pursue it.
We have a close relationship with the Alberta Association of Police Governance, which is an organization that advocates for us as a community that has an oversight body. Police committee is built to look at things like this and handle things. We can use that advocacy group. Tom could take those issues there, and we could certainly go there and say enough's enough.
Barb? Just two things on that. So I think that's great anytime we could try to reduce costs, but I would suggest this is the budget figure as it is, and this is what the RCMP has indicated they're going to bill us, so it should probably be built in the budget, right? I did mention I was on a webinar yesterday, so again, they did mention some of those costs were mandated, for example, out of the Moncton incident, so they don't have a choice. They've been directed by the courts to provide that training and that extra equipment, so that is some of that in here. And I did want to say just on that equitable funding rule, they spoke briefly about that yesterday, and they did say although the minister had said they wanted to do things, the comment yesterday was it's off the table at this point in time. Okay.
I agree, but it will come eventually, perhaps with the new government, but it's coming down the tube. It will have an effect on us as a detachment that have rural and municipal components. But I honestly think that should be left to a delegation, and we should challenge some of these. Every time there's an international event or something like that, they second officers from here, and we still end up paying for it.
Okay, is that all? Everybody? Okay, meeting adjourned. Oops.
Oh, we have the unfortunate discussion of how we're going to pay for what I believe is now down to $236,000 in new spending.
Oops.
I'm down to 236. Is that right?
I thought we had to wait a day to figure that out. Look at you go.
Well, the Olympics I'm interested in doesn't start for a while. So, Barb, what's the latest figure on X equals 1 point in increase in property taxes? 88K?
If I can convert again, it's dangerous to always say how much in property taxes, right?
Yeah.
Because we're talking increase to municipal budget.
Right.
So the increase 1% is roughly 83,000.
Okay.
To increase to the municipal budget.
And you already, the budget that was before us
2%.
was with 2%, and all the trimming we were able to do didn't even add up to 1/4 of 1%. Because by my calculation, well, sorry, that's not true. It added up to almost 1/2 of 1%. It was maybe 30K is all I think we trimmed, if that. So it was nominal. So 236 divided by, what do you figure? Yeah. So we would, so funding it entirely from a property tax increase would look a lot like a 5% property tax increase. Discuss.
Comments, Lisa.
Well, I'm just going to throw it out there. So last council, we were willing to get a contracted economic development officer by using reserves for $60,000. What would you feel if we actually funded the economic development task force $100,000 by reserves?
Can I make a suggestion on the economic development task force? My suggestion is, why don't you wait to see what comes forward, because it's just a random number or anything, and some of what they bring forward may be capital, and then a decision at that time could be made, a motion to move money from reserve or to fund an additional capital project. But maybe you want to just take it out of the mix now, knowing it's coming, when you make other considerations on reserve. It's just an idea.
Could be a 255, right? So, yeah.
Tony.
The query that I said before on the salaries and the wages and stuff, that's in this budget number, right? That we're calculating this percentage increase on. When are we going to be able to see that information? And if so, there may be some trimming from that, not?
I do have some higher level sort of explanations, but we haven't gotten all down to the finite details that you were looking for. But just kind of, I have some things I can just kind of walk through in comparison to 2014 to 2017. So one thing I wanted to bring to your attention was on that email I sent out when you were comparing, I thought it was budget number 2014, 15, 16. I had labeled it actual budget, but it was actually actual. So I was comparing actuals. But in the email you had sent, you'd said the budget went this much difference. Okay, so I just need to put that clarifying in there. But if I can just talk through a couple of things regarding salary. So we're talking a difference from 2014 to 2018. So a couple of things for consideration. Just off the top, 2015 saw 3.5% QP increase. 2015 was 2%. 2016 was 2%. And we're going into 2018 at 2.5%. Back in 2014, you were asking about new positions. So 2014, in the end of Q4, we did create a new position, Director of Protective Services. In 2014, when you look at the actual results are 104,000 less than they truly were. And that is because when I came on board, there used to be an employee obligation for vacation time, long service benefit, and there was an accrual for sick time. And I questioned why we had an accrual for sick time, because there was no obligation to pay it out. So over 3 years, I reduced that accrual. So in 2014 was $104,000 credit. 2015 was $27,000 credit. 2016 was another $63,800. So you just would have to add those to the actual values. 2017 bargaining included 3 permanent part-time positions at BCF, new. 2017 included a significant increase to fire honorariums, which was another $20,000 expenditure. And then I just wanted to talk too, when you're comparing 2014 to 2018 numbers, the BCF was opened in 2013. So as programs and staffing and all that get ramped up, obviously more staff, because what we had in 2014 we just knew, right? And then on top of that, the inside local, their staff are on steps, 4 steps. So when a staff member goes, it takes 2 years to get from step 1 to step 4, but there could be a difference of almost $5 in the steps from step 1. So the differences range. The differences in step, depending on the position, ranges from $2.10 at step 1 to step 4, or up to $4.83. And then, of course, all those QP additions. So all of the staff over the last 2 years at BCF too have now topped up to their maximum steps. So we haven't necessarily added people, but one person could be an extra $9,000 or $10,000, and then all the added benefits. And then one other thing that kind of came, we were just doing some numbers today. So we took our 214 WCB rate, and we did a quick calculation. If we just assume $6.5 million for salary, it's just a number we picked, right? WCB at our 2014 rate would have been $66,000, and in 2017 rate, $177,000. So, and we are working back on the right direction down on our WCB, but that just kind of explains. So it's really hard. Like, we're challenged to try to get some of the questions you're asking, but these are some of the things. I said, if you just added the QP increases worked out to some odd thousand, just on a rough, quick and dirty. Yeah. Just rough, and I said, and then our WCB, and then of course our benefits have risen significantly. Our health and dental, because we're getting used, so 15% health and dental, or 12% increase this year. Last year it was a 15%. So those costs, and then again, there's some. It should have been higher than reported in the financials, but there's reasoning behind those numbers, right? So.
Sorry, you're saying a large part of that's inflationary. That's a big number. I was thinking more along the lines of overtime and paid out vacations and those kinds of things, but I wouldn't. I mean, 600,000 is a good part of that, but how is that going to be sustainable going forward? If we're at 28%, we're at 32. Like, this isn't going to get any less, is it? Going forward.
So a couple of things too. One other thing I forgot to mention, that 500,000. So the budget numbers, or the actual numbers when you're budgeting, again, typically those capital maintenance items, right, would have another 500,000 in the budget, which is not yet reflected in my budget. So when I add another 500,000, that'll bring down that percentage a bit. Right. Okay. As far as sick time accrual and vacation time, I'm sorry, I did print it and I forgot to bring it up to you. But I'll submit it out. But it is online, so Civic Web, Drumheller Civic Web, and policies, and HR policy, and under vacation is like Article 7.1. Say if you want to look, but essentially is like we're not allowed to carry over forward vacation. The policy is the CAO is entitled to approve 1 week additionally. And a while ago so vacation is accrued every year. So even if there was a payout, for example, it's paid out in the accrual, right? So the vacation earnings that are earned that year are accrued into the general ledger, and the same with long service benefits. So even when our long serving CAO retired and had 40 years worth of long service benefit, it didn't impact the financial statements that year because it had been accrued. Those 2 days every year had been accrued all along. And so similarly, rarely do we ever have a vacation payout. I think there may have been one since I've been here. It requires special approval. So maybe there's 2 since I've been here. I said it does require CAO approval, so that really, and again, if it is a payout, it's out of the vacation accrual that's in the financial statements. So it doesn't impact the annual expense.
Yeah, that would make sense. It would come from the accrual, but the expense is charged every year, whether it's used or not, right? So yeah, but wow, that's a big number.
Yeah, I'm sorry that does. So every year, 2 more days per every employee is accrued for long service benefit in the event that they meet the obligation or a time period, right?
Tony, just councilors to comment on overtime. And just one of the things is that, so when we have all of the great events in town, whether it be the big ball drop or Canada Day or Festival of Lights, big ball bounce, or big big ball bounce. Those folks that are working from the town, unless they're out of scope employees, they're all getting paid for overtime on that, right? So if you see 6 or 8 or 10 people on Canada Day working at the BCF, at the various areas know that those folks are all getting paid double time and a half. Is that no double time?
Yeah.
It's double time
On a
and
stat
half.
holiday, absolutely. And Canada Day is pretty much all hands on deck.
Right.
Right.
So again, those things that we do for the community, there's like a significant cost in some of those areas for that. So just it's just one of the things to be cognizant of. If we look at where we can try to trim things, that's just one of those areas that sticks out a bit. Right? Is that I don't think anyone would be happy if we said, well, we won't support Canada Day anymore, for instance, right?
Jay.
Thank you. I think Tony's inquiries are right on the mark. I mean, we've never had those figures, in my recollection, relayed to us in just that same way, and it was striking, and it has reasonable explanations, and that's what I'm glad you brought to the table. The more detail you can provide at some other point is appropriate, and I do think that we're serious about some kind of corporate review in 2019 that will help us get a good sense on whether we are appropriately staffed, understaffed. But I also have to agree that, I wouldn't have been surprised to find out that 20 or 30% of those costs alone were all BCF, because you'll remember, Tony, those initial conversations around staffing models was an absolute shot in the dark. And we learned real fast, because I went from steering committee to getting elected. We learned real fast. We got it way wrong by a pretty big margin in terms of how many people it was actually going to take. And so what I'm suggesting we do, guys, is circle back to the fact that we're right now at 3.6% roughly property tax increase when we take the 100,000 from the Economic Development Task Force out of the operating budget as it stands right now, and consider it as still an absolute true that we will fund those recommendations to the extent that we can afford, but that we may do a withdrawal from reserves to do it at that time. So my question to council is, if we give Barb enough time to come back and confirm if that's close, if that's a palatable enough situation, or if we're still talking about reducing that further. And the only other ways to do that is to go back through this painstaking process we've already engaged in and cut, or the only other alternative is to do what Lisa was suggesting earlier, and that is additional withdrawals from the accumulated surplus. And so by my math, if we were to reduce our amortization by another, I don't know, I think if it was by another 60,000 or so, we could actually get ourselves in the realm of a 3% property tax hike, which I think is certainly within the scope of what the community could grudgingly accept, given that they had no increase last year. That would be my argument, is that we try to find a balancing figure from the accumulated surplus, or from our amortization that we would not put away in reserves, to bring that overall increase to 3%. And frankly, I think that's just the direction we could give back to administration. And unless we're prepared to actually roll up our sleeves, stay here a hell of a lot longer and talk about actually going back in to cut something.
So we're discussing capital on Monday night, and what I'm looking at Barb, but is that something we could bring back, that information, to talk about on Monday night?
Oh, so if I understand correctly, we're going to put these additions in. We're going to change the municipal requisition to 3%, and then we'll see how much of a deficit is left that would need to be funded from reserve.
I think two versions of it. So that would be version one, and the other version is just taking the 100,000 funded by reserves, and then leave everything else in to see what that number was, right? Because I think you're thinking it's maybe 3.6, 3.4.
With that 100,000 out, it's down to 3.6.
Right. So that would be like a sort of another option, just to kind of show the base of that, right? So.
Fred?
Well, I know I've been harping on this too, but I'd really like to see the realistic actual cost of the carbon tax over the last 2 years and projected this year. If we have an increase of 3.6 and we can tie $40,000 or $50,000 of that increase to not us, to somebody else that added tax on top, then that's less flack that we have to take and we have no control over. And so I'd really like to see a breakdown and a serious one. That's got to be building heating. We've got the pool, the DCF, the town facility. We've got fuel. You know, anything where we're paying carbon tax.
So, oh, excuse me, sorry. So, in my task is to do communication of estimated carbon tax from 2017. So I have emailed our energy service provider. She's going to get back to me. They just need to work their magic. The other big one would be our fuel purchases. But other than that, they're very cost for the most part, right? So I'm working on communicating the 2017 actual identified. I said the 2017 budget, when I was asked about the provision, I said I believe our provision this year, although it's less than last year, the impact this year is half of what was last year. And this year's budget is based on all of last year's costs, which again had the carbon tax in it. And then our utility budget, which is the primary area where we spend carbon tax, we're protected from carbon tax in our electrical till 2020. And I know originally, I think it was estimated $40,000 additional in gas. But again, our budget reflects all that because they provide the budget to us based on all the tariffs and all of that stuff for our utilities. So the best I say, I'm working on my directive to do the 2017. In 2017, we know it cost us X for certain, and then some. Because I said I can't go back in every little courier that charged us extra or whatever. We couldn't go back and do all that.
I'm certainly not saying that.
No, I know.
I just think people want they see it on their power bill. They see it on that. If you go in and you say taxes are going to go up X, and of that X, this percentage is directly correlated to the carbon tax. That's something we're not responsible for.
And I think we're probably going to get there, Barb. I think we're just going like this. I mean, you're going to provide us with a number that's probably, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it came off of damn close to $80,000. Especially even if on fuel alone we don't get there, or on natural gas we don't get there. The reality is that it's not a stretch for us to say that even though maybe all of our prices didn't go up by 2% last year, it's fair to say that the majority of people we deal with still charged us more than they did before. We just may have bought less of it, right? And so we're talking more about a political message than we are a financial one. And so that's one of the reasons why I'd like to see us get down to 3%, is that I don't believe it's a stretch in any way, shape, or form to actually say that 1% of that is a reaction to the expected impact of the carbon tax. That's a message I believe would be factually accurate. So that was kind of the rationale behind trying to get down to 3 points.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that just bury it in there. So that's what Fred's saying, so just to get us a ballpark. And as well, I mean, and then you take, adding that RCMP cost that we hadn't planned in, that's a whole percent there. So between the carbon tax and that, we're already at 2% that we had absolutely no control of. So I think overall, and then the fact that, there wasn't any taxes last year, because I'm looking at past communities, and, they're roughly 2 to as high as 3.90%. So, we're in the range. So we'll wait to get some final numbers. Okay, is that it? Everybody? Okay. This meeting is adjourned at 750. I'm trying to say if I say